Talk boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this per tweet from Rob Tebbett. WBC has ordered former unified lightweight champion Teofimo Lopez versus Sandor Martin as a final eliminator for the winner of Jose Zapata versus Regis Prograrius. We know that Teofimo Lopez will see action at least one more time before this year is out against former two-division champion of Puerto Rico, Jose Zapata.
Zapata versus Prograis is set to go down later on this month towards the tail end of it, and Lopez versus Pedraza, that's set to go down early next month on the 10th.
I like the idea of a Sandor Martin versus Teofimo Lopez fight. However, I'm not holding my breath to see the fight come into fruition because should Teofimo Lopez make it past Jose Pedraza, he'll be in a pole position to challenge for the brown belt, the WBO title, which will be on the line in Taylor versus Catterall 2, set to go down early next year.
In other words, Teofimo's not after the green belt. He's not on the WBC route, so their order will likely fall on deaf ears.
It's unfortunate because it's an intriguing little fight, but, I don't expect to see it happen. So when Teofimo Lopez disregards this order, the WBC will likely move down their ranks for the next highest available ranked contender to share the ring with Sandor Martin.
Well, at least for his last few fights, has been a matchroom fighter. Don't know if he still is.
Ranked behind Sandor Martin is Gary Russell's younger brother, Gary Antoine Russell, 140-pounder, southpaw, PBC fighter. A fight between Sandor and Gary would be a battle of the southpaws. That's an intriguing fight in and of itself. Sandor Martin is a more mobile...
He's got a great set of legs, that guy, and he's a more mobile target than anybody that Gary Antoine Russell has fought so far. I don't know how realistic that fight is.
Boxer versus the puncher. Sandor Martin being the boxer and Gary Antoine Russell being the puncher. It's an intriguing fight, it is, but like I said, I don't know how realistic it is. Ranked behind Gary Antoine Russell is Jose Ramirez, former unified super lightweight champion Jose Ramirez. If by some chance Gary passes on the fight,
maybe we get Sandor Martin versus Jose Ramirez. Former champion Jose Ramirez, a mid-range to inside pressure fighter, a durable one.
Same dynamic as the Gary Antoine Russell fight. Sandor Martin would be the boxer and Jose Ramirez would be the puncher.
Ranked behind Jose Ramirez is Golden Boy Promotions' own Golden Boy, Ryan Garcia. Is rumored to be fighting Gervonta Davis sometime in the near future, but those talks have lost traction due to what are being reported as network issues.
Distribution issues between Showtime and DAZN. They're trying to work out who the broadcaster for the fight is. I don't even know if they're still trying to work that out or if those talks have fizzled out altogether. Better still, I could go for a Ryan Garcia versus Sandor Martin fight. There's something very pedestrian about Ryan Garcia's fights and who specifically he's been fighting. He needs to take it up a notch.
The opposite the ring of southpaw wouldn't be the first time that's happened. Luke Campbell was a southpaw. More recently, Javier Fortuna, who he knocked him out the same way he knocked out Luke Campbell. He was a southpaw as well. Sandor Martin is a very crafty southpaw.
If by some chance Ryan's not interested, ranked right behind him is unbeaten up-and-comer Arnold Barboza and former super lightweight IBF champion Sergey Lipinets. Any one of those two guys would be an interesting opponent option for Sandor Martin, but in a nutshell, I do not expect Teofimo Lopez to comply with this order by way of the WBC because he's already in pursuit of a title by way of the WBO. And all he's got to do is beat Jose Pedraza later on this year. So that's what I expect him to do.
Yeah, he's not going to comply with this order. He's not. He's going to hold out for the winner of Catterall versus Taylor 2.
Likely face the winner of that fight in the second or third quarter of next year.
That's what I expect him to do.
Among the many orders issued out at the WBC's annual convention, they issued out an order for Shakur Stevenson, two-division champion Shakur Stevenson, who's on his way up to the lightweight division. They issued out an order for Shakur to take on Isaac Pitbull Cruz in a 135-pound final eliminator. This is yet another fight I don't expect to happen.
For more reasons than one.
The winner of this fight would be intended to challenge the winner of Vasyl Lomachenko versus Devin Haney, which we're hearing is already underway. The negotiations for that fight are ongoing. And Shakur Stevenson is in the right place to get that fight, with or without an order from the WBC. They don't actually need to fight Isaac Pitbull Cruz to fight the winner of that fight, not in theory.
That's the first thing. The second thing is, I don't expect Isaac Pitbull Cruz to cross over to the top-ranked side of things, and I certainly don't expect Shakur Stevenson to cross over to the PBC side of things.
That's set of negotiations. Hypothetically speaking, of course. Shakur Stevenson would be the A-side fighter to Isaac Cruz, make no mistake. Isaac Cruz's claim to fame is a moral victory, going the distance in a fight that he lost against Gervonta Davis. He's never been an alphabet champion at any weight. He doesn't really have any high-profile wins, signature wins.
I mean, Sean Gibbons and the people at Manny Pacquiao Promotions may be milking that moral victory for everything it's worth with Isaac Cruz. They're trying to build him up, fatten him up.
Because he, unlike Rolly Romero and Leo Santa Cruz, actually managed to go the distance with Gervonta Davis and give him some resistance. They're milking that for everything it's worth. That's what they're doing, when in reality, they should be chomping at the bit to get somebody like Shakur Stevenson in the ring, and I don't think they are, because in order to get him in the ring, you need to go to the top-ranked side of things, my friend.
I don't know who's going to walk away from this. I don't know if it's going to be Shakur that walks away or Isaac, but on the premise that Isaac is non-compliant.
On the premise that the Manny Pacquiao people pull him out of this situation and just go their own way, do their own thing, which is essentially what they've been doing. Ranked right behind Isaac Cruz is George Kambosos. I could see a fight between Shakur Stevenson and George happening before I see a fight with Isaac Cruz and George happening. The same applies to Shakur Stevenson and Zaur Abdullayev, who would serve as a common opponent between Shakur and the reigning undisputed champion at lightweight, Devin Haney. I could see Shakur Stevenson versus Zaur Abdullayev happening long before I could see that fight happening for Isaac.
Joseph Diaz is ranked right behind Zaur Abdullayev, but Joseph just got his bell rung by William Zepeda.
I don't think he'd end up fighting Shakur. Ranked behind Joseph is Ivan Mendy, a guy I think is a little bit more likely to share the ring with Shakur than Jojo Diaz. And ranked right behind Ivan Mendy is Jermaine Ortiz. We all know just fought Vasily Lomachenko and gave him all he could handle. Yet another guy who might fight Shakur long before some of these other guys and long before Isaac Cruz. In a nutshell, this is yet another fight that the WBC ordered at their convention that I don't expect to see materialize.
Isaac Cruz is over there on the PBC side of things, and all the fighters that the PBC has at or around these weights.
The entire focus of their efforts seems to be landing a Gervonta Davis fight, because that's the biggest name the PBC has anywhere at or around those weights. Post-fight, after the Gervonta Davis fight, for some time now, Isaac Cruz and his team have expressed an interest in running it back with Gervonta, doing a second fight, doing a rematch. And I'd sooner expect that...
Yeah, I'd sooner expect to see Isaac run it back with Gervonta Davis. I'd sooner expect to see him fighting him for a second time than fighting Shakur Stevenson once.
I don't think that's going to happen. I don't. Don't forget, some months ago, Oscar De La Hoya and Golden Boy Promotions were reported to have made Isaac a 7-figure offer to come over to their side of things and box Ryan Garcia. Sean Gibbons was adamant that he wants to do it on the Showtime side of things, as if Isaac Cruz is in any position to dictate terms to Ryan Garcia. Ryan Garcia is by far and wide a bigger name and the A-side fighter to Isaac Cruz. Regardless of how you think the fight plays out, regardless of who you think wins, before we get there, Isaac Cruz and his team would need to acquiesce to being the B-side to Ryan, and they didn't want to do that.
They didn't want to acquiesce to being the B-side to Ryan Garcia, so you think they're going to want to acquiesce to being the B-side to Shakur Stevenson?
I don't think so. I think they're going to stay safely tucked away on PBC Island and continue to try and build Isaac Cruz into some kind of a name, irrespective of the other young fighters and the other young stars at or around these weights. I don't expect Cruz versus Stevenson to materialize. Yet another fight that the WBC ordered at their convention, an in-house fight between unbeaten up-and-comer Sebastian Fundora and former WBC champion Tony Harrison. Now that fight, unlike the previous two fights I talked about, that fight is a fight that actually can happen. I believe that it will happen. It's an in-house PBC fight.
In theory, it should be an easy fight to make.
Stylistically, Sebastian Fundora, the unbeaten up-and-comer, stylistically, he's got the edge because he's a more prolific puncher than the outside fighter, the outside jabber, the former champion, Tony Harrison. I believe that this fight could yield a very similar aesthetic to the Willie Nelson fight Tony Harrison had some years ago, the fight where he was stopped.
Willie Nelson, much like Sebastian Fundora, was a very tall, long guy for 154 pounds. And like Sebastian, he was a mid-range to inside fighter. He wasn't an outside guy.
Willie Nelson, Jarrett Hurd, former unified champion Jarrett Hurd, and Sebastian Fundora, they have that in common, that even though they're very statuesque and long for that prescribed weight, they don't actually use their height very much. They don't actually use their length and their reach as much as you would expect them to, given how physically imposing they are. They're mid-range to inside fighters. Sebastian is at his best.
Yeah, he does his best work mid-range to inside. You saw what he did to Erickson Lubin, mid-range to inside. And I expect that Fundora versus Harrison might look a lot like...
It might look a lot like Willie Nelson versus Harrison. It might look a lot like Jarrett Hurd versus Harrison.
Tony Harrison and Sebastian Fundora share a common opponent in Sergio Garcia. Tony's coming off a decision win over Sergio in April of this year. Depending on when this fight happens...
Could be upwards of 10 or 11 months that Tony will not have seen action. Tony hasn't been all that active the last 2-3 years. That Sergio Garcia fight was the only fight he had all of this year. Last year, he only fought once.
Split decision win over Brian Perella. Didn't look great in that fight. That was the only fight he had last year. The year before that, he hadn't fought at all.
He sat out all of 2020, so the last 2-3 years, Tony hasn't been very active. Sebastian has fought twice as much in the last 2 years. He fought 2 times last year, 2 times this year. One would assume that this fight between Tony and Sebastian is set to go down in either the first or second quarter of next year.
Sebastian has several things working for him. That he's a younger, fresher fighter, not as war-torn. He's never been stopped.
He's a bigger and longer fighter than Tony Harrison, perhaps even a stronger puncher, and stylistically, he definitely has an edge because Tony Harrison at his best is a pure boxer, an outside jabber that can slow a fight down.
Fighting on his toes, staying on the balls of his feet, boxing from the outside, sticking and moving and trying to limit the other man's opportunities to pin him down and unload hard shots.
Opposite the ring, a boxer-puncher, Tony Harrison would be the one that has the stylistic edge, but opposite the ring, a mid-range to inside pressure fighter who's going to swarm him, try to stay on him and get all over him. Well, in that situation, Sebastian's got the edge. We've seen this play out before. We saw it in the Willie Nelson fight. We saw it in the Jarrett Hurd fight. And at some point next year, we might see it again in the Sebastian Fundora fight. Unless Tony Harrison...
Tony's not a bad boxer, you know. He's actually one of the better pure boxers at or around these weights. But this dynamic and the physical dimensions of Sebastian Fundora, it just feels like history is repeating itself.
The winner of the fight ends up in a pole position to challenge the winner of Jermel Charlo versus Tim Tszyu, which is also set to go down early next year. You wonder if Jermel Charlo is going to stick around long enough to face Sebastian Fundora, or will at some point he move up in weight and vacate all those alphabet titles?
He's been at 154 for a very long time.
You know, on a PBC fighter schedule, it could be anywhere between a couple of months to a year between fights. So how long would it take for Sebastian Fundora to get the winner of Charlo versus Tszyu in the ring?
In any event, when it comes to this fight, I actually expect that it will happen, and you have to give Sebastian Fundora the edge.
There are a lot of similarities between this fight and Harrison versus Nelson, Harrison versus Hurd, Harrison versus Fundora. There are a lot of the same elements in play. Finally, yet another fight that was ordered at the WBC's convention. It has now been officially ordered. Keith Thurman versus Errol Spence Jr.
We knew this was coming.
We've known it was coming for weeks. We've known it was coming for months. The moment the WBC decided to rank Keith Thurman as their number one welterweight for beating Mario Barrios, of all people, a guy who's accomplished nothing as a welterweight, beaten no one as a welterweight. Hell, a fight before that, he got knocked out by a 135-pounder at 140. So let's make him the gatekeeper.
If you can beat Mario Barrios, we'll make you number one.
Think about it. Keith Thurman has fought once, just once, in the last 2 years, once overall this year.
Pretty fucking frivolous if you ask me.
But if you're asking me, they were always planning on making this fight clandestinely. The PBC were doing whatever they had to do to make this Errol Spence Jr.'s next fight. Because how the hell could fighting Mario Barrios get you a number one spot by way of the WBC?
That don't happen by accident. That don't happen on its own.
I'll tell you, I don't imagine Montes Stanionis is too pleased to hear about this. Montes Stanionis, who agreed to step aside last year so that Errol Spence Jr. and Yordenis Ugas could unify titles this year. Montes Stanionis was actually the mandatory challenger.
He was the mandatory challenger by way of the WBA before Keith Thurman became the mandatory challenger by way of the WBC.
Late last year, Montes Stanionis had already achieved mandatory status, whereas Keith didn't achieve his mandatory status by way of the WBC. He didn't achieve that until this year. Yet somehow Keith Thurman magically gets to cut ahead of him in the line. It's not by coincidence. It's not by accident. It's by design. This is what the PBC always wanted.
They told Stanionis whatever they had to tell him last year, got him to stand down to clear the way for Errol to fight Ugas this year. Screwed him out of his title shot in the process. This year is all but come and gone. And Stanionis did not get the title shot that he was promised.
WBA doesn't seem to be doing a goddamn thing about it.
The IBF doesn't appear to be applying any pressure on Errol either. When's the last time he satisfied a mandatory for them? 3 or 4 years ago?
The truth is, I don't think the people at the PBC had any intention of getting the Crawford fight over the line, and that's evident in Tim Smith's comments from earlier this year, stating quite plainly
he didn't think people would buy the fight. He felt that people would steal it.
So when a VP of communications at the PBC is making public statements like that, you tell me, what about that expresses commitment towards doing the fight? I'm telling you, the PBC was never committed to doing a Crawford versus Spence fight. Underneath it all, this is the fight they were always going to make. They negotiated in bad faith for weeks and for months.
They negotiated in bad faith with Terrence Crawford. It wasn't really their intention to get a deal done.
They negotiated in bad faith because underneath it all, they knew they were already working on this.
They were already working clandestinely on a Thurman versus Spence fight. Never mind Errol Spence Jr.'s public protests.
That he doesn't want to give that guy the time of day. Never mind what you heard him say in that quote-unquote leaked audio where he claims he's not going to fight Keith Thurman. Never mind any of that, because what I see is that this is the fight they've been working on all along.
They worked it out with the WBC, the Wiz. So long as Keith Thurman wins his next fight, whoever it's against, he'll be in a position to challenge Errol as his mandatory.
The cover story: no matter how frivolous the opponent, fighting Mario Barrios, who was just knocked out at 140, fighting him at 147, that'll get you mandatory status. Not fighting Virgil Ortiz or somebody else. Fight that guy, you're number one.
So that Errol would have the perfect excuse to fight him.
Because now he has to fight him. He's
His mandatory challenger.
It's all bullshit. It's all fucking bullshit.
Smoke, mirrors, and brazen chicanery.
It's all fucking bullshit.
They were always gonna make this fight.